They rejected a poor woman at a fancy event, then froze when they saw her husband. Emma stumbled back as the doorman blocked her path. His hand was firm against her shoulder, his expression filled with disgust. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Her fingers trembled as she clutched the invitation in her hands. "I was invited," she said, her voice calm but firm. The doorman chuckled mockingly. "People like you don't get invited here." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Elegant women in designer gowns turned to stare. Then, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Who let her in?" Emma turned. Sophia Kingston stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes burning with cruelty. "This is an exclusive event, not a charity dinner." Emma's face burned. But just as security grabbed her arm, the doors swung open. A deep voice boomed, "Touch my wife and you'll regret it." The entire room froze. The grand ballroom of the Kingston Hotel was breathtaking. Gold chandeliers, crystal-clear champagne glasses, and guests dressed in the finest designer clothes. It was a world of wealth, luxury, and exclusivity. Emma Carter, however, stood out like a sore thumb. She wasn't wearing a $10,000 dress or diamond jewelry. She wore a simple, elegant gown, nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, just graceful and modest. But in a place where wealth was everything, that was enough to make her an outcast. She had walked in with confidence, invitation in hand, but it had taken seconds for the whispers to start. Who is she? Is she lost? She doesn't belong here. And then the doorman had stepped in her way. Sophia Kingston, the event organizer, descended the grand staircase, her expensive gown flowing behind her. Sophia was beautiful, wealthy, and cruel. She thrived on status and power, and to her, Emma was nothing more than an embarrassment. "I don't know how you got an invitation," Sophia said loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "But we both know you don't belong here." Emma's grip tightened on her invitation. She had every right to be here. "Check the list," she said calmly. Sophia let out a short laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't need to. I know who belongs here." She turned to the staff. "Escort her out." The doorman grabbed Emma's arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And that's when it happened. The doors at the entrance swung open with force. A deep, commanding voice echoed through the room. "Let her go." The ballroom fell into a stunned silence. Every guest turned toward the entrance, and when they saw who had spoken, they froze in shock. Because standing there, in a tailored black suit, exuding wealth and power, was Alexander Carter, a billionaire, a legend, one of the most powerful men in the city, and the husband of the woman they had just humiliated. The room fell silent. Alexander Carter stood at the entrance, his piercing gaze sweeping across the ballroom. His presence was undeniable, commanding, powerful, untouchable. And right now, his cold stare was fixed on one person, Sophia Kingston. The color drained from Sophia's face. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out, because she had made a terrible mistake. Alexander walked forward, slow and controlled, as if giving everyone time to process what they had just witnessed. The whispers started. "That's Alexander Carter, the billionaire. Wait, did he just say wife?" Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding as her husband reached her side. With the most gentle touch, he took her hand in his. His thumb brushed over her fingers, a silent reassurance. Then he turned back to Sophia, his voice calm but sharp as steel. "Would you like to explain why my wife was just humiliated in front of your guests?" Sophia flinched. Mr. Carter, I didn't know she was—" Alexander tilted his head. "Didn't know she was what? A guest? Someone with an invitation? Or is it that you didn't know she was my wife?" Sophia swallowed hard. Alexander didn't wait for her to answer. He turned to the doorman, his voice deadly calm. "You." The doorman snapped to attention, his face pale. "Who gave you permission to put your hands on my wife?" The doorman opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Sophia, as if silently begging for help. Sophia stepped forward, desperate to regain control. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said quickly, forcing a laugh. "We have strict entry rules. I assumed—" Alexander raised a hand, cutting her off. "You assumed she wasn't important." His voice was quiet, but the authority in it was deafening. Sophia's fingers tensed against her dress. I just thought—" Alexander's eyes hardened. "Number you didn't think. That's the problem." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Emma could see the tension in Sophia's posture, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she clenched her fists. She was scared. Good. Because for years, Sophia had treated people like they were beneath her. She had destroyed reputations with a whisper, humiliated anyone she deemed less worthy. And tonight, she had finally been exposed. Alexander took a slow breath, then spoke loud enough for everyone in the ballroom to hear. "My wife is not only my partner, she is the co-founder of one of the most successful charitable organizations in this city. She has dedicated her life to helping people, while you," he glanced at Sophia, "have spent yours tearing them down." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emma felt the shift in the air. The same people who had judged her minutes ago were now looking at Sophia with thinly veiled disgust. Sophia opened her mouth, but no excuse could save her now. Alexander leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough for only Sophia to hear. "You wanted power, Sophia. You wanted status. Congratulations. You just became the example of what happens when you abuse it." Sophia's breath hitched, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. The ballroom was dead silent. Sophia stood frozen, her once confident posture now tense. Alexander Carter, the most powerful man in the room, had just humiliated her in front of everyone. Emma, still holding his hand, could feel the energy shift. Moments ago, she had been judged, ridiculed, pushed aside. Now, the entire event had turned into a spectacle, one that Sophia would never live down. Sophia tried to salvage the situation. Forcing a smile, she took a step forward. "Mr. Carter, this was all just a misunderstanding." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding." Sophia nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. If I had known she was your wife, this never would have happened." Alexander's expression darkened. "So, if she wasn't my wife, you would have been fine treating her this way." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The guests around them exchanged glances, whispers spreading like wildfire. "She only cares about status." How embarrassing. She thought she could control this event, and now look. Sophia's perfect world was crumbling. Alexander let go of Emma's hand and took a slow step toward Sophia. His presence was suffocating. "People like you," he said, his voice cold, "measure worth in money and appearances. But real power isn't in wealth, it's in how you treat people." Sophia flushed red. She opened her mouth, but Alexander wasn't finished. "I trusted this event to be handled professionally. Instead, you used it as a way to look down on others." He gestured around the room. "Your little spectacle, it just cost you everything." Sophia stiffened. What do you mean?" Alexander turned to the crowd. "Effective immediately, Sophia Kingston is no longer associated with my company, my events, or any of my business partnerships." A loud gasp erupted from the guests. Sophia's entire face drained of color. "No, wait, please, Mr. Carter, we can fix this," she stammered, stepping forward. Alexander didn't even blink. You just made yourself irrelevant, Sophia. Sophia stood there, shaking. This couldn't be happening. This was her event, her social circle, and in a matter of minutes, it was gone. The doorman, the same man who had shoved Emma away minutes ago, stood awkwardly by the entrance, sweating. Alexander turned to him. As for you, the doorman flinched. Sir, I was just following orders. Alexander studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke, voice even. Next time, think for yourself. The doorman exhaled shakily, nodding. Emma, still silent, watched everything unfold. And then, something incredible happened. One by one, guests started coming up to her. Mrs. Carter, we're so sorry for what happened. You have every right to be here. Please, allow us to make it up to you. The same people who had judged her, ignored her, looked down on her, were now desperate for her approval. Emma finally smiled, not because she needed their validation, but because they had just learned an important lesson. And so had Sophia Kingston. Sophia Kingston stood frozen, her entire world falling apart. Just minutes ago, she was the queen of this event. Now she was a nobody. Alexander Carter had spoken, and that was the end of her reign. The guests she once commanded with a glance were now avoiding her gaze. No one wanted to be associated with her downfall. She turned back to Alexander, desperate. Mr. Carter, please, you don't have to do this. Alexander tilted his head slightly. Do what? Hold you accountable. Sophia's breathing was shaky. I swear, I didn't know who she was. If I had, I never would have treated her like that. Emma finally spoke. And that's exactly the problem, Sophia. Sophia whipped her head toward Emma, her face flushed with humiliation. Emma's voice was calm, but firm. You shouldn't treat people differently based on their status. Whether I was Alexander's wife or a stranger off the street, I deserved respect. Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it, because she knew Emma was right. The entire ballroom was watching, waiting. Emma took a slow step forward. Her voice was steady, full of quiet power. You judged me based on my clothes, my appearance. You assumed I wasn't important because I didn't look like you. Sophia's fingers tightened into fists. Emma met her gaze, unshaken. But you know what's funny? Emma continued. In this entire room, you're the least important person here. A hushed gasp swept through the guests. Sophia trembled. Her eyes flickered toward the exit like she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to hide. Alexander placed a hand on Emma's back, a proud smile forming on his lips. He turned to the crowd. Tonight's event was supposed to celebrate generosity and kindness, but it became a lesson instead. The whispers among the guests grew. Emma took a deep breath. This was her moment. I didn't come here to prove my worth. She glanced at Sophia. I already know it. Then she looked at Alexander, her voice soft but strong. I came here to support my husband, but now I have a better idea. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Oh? Emma turned to the audience. Instead of honoring the people in this room, I'd like to shift the focus. She smiled, her confidence radiating. Tonight, every donation made will go directly to my charity, the one that helps underprivileged women find careers, housing, and opportunities. The crowd erupted in applause. Sophia looked horrified. Alexander grinned. I love that idea. He turned to the event coordinator. Double the donation. Sophia staggered back. The event she planned was now Emma's victory, and there was nothing she could do about it. She had lost. The ballroom erupted in applause. Emma stood at the center of it all, no longer the woman who was rejected at the door, but the woman who owned the room. Sophia Kingston staggered back,
Her once perfect confidence shattered. The event she had worked so hard to control had just been taken from her. And the worst part? Everyone supported it. Alexander Carter smiled as he watched his wife turn humiliation into triumph. Emma wasn't just here as his wife. She was here as a leader, a woman of strength, a woman who had just changed the purpose of the entire event. One of the guests, an older woman in an elegant dress, stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, I had no idea you were behind the Women's Empowerment Fund. That charity has changed so many lives." Emma smiled. "That's exactly why I do it. Because real value isn't in money, it's in how we help others." Another guest nodded. "I'd like to make a personal donation. Your work deserves it." Then another, "Me too." And just like that, the donations started pouring in. This wasn't just a victory, this was a transformation. Emma had turned judgment into generosity. Sophia stood in the background watching as everything unraveled. The guests who once clamored for her attention now completely ignored her. Her fingers trembled. Her reputation, her power, everything was slipping away. Taking a shaky breath, she finally stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly. "Emma." Emma turned, raising an eyebrow. Sophia hesitated, then looked down, her voice quieter than ever. I was wrong." A few guests turned to watch. Sophia swallowed her pride. "I treated you unfairly. I judged you by your appearance, and I made a fool of myself."
Emma studied her for a long moment. The woman who once looked down on her now stood in front of her, humbled. For the first time, Sophia wasn't faking it. She was truly ashamed. Emma could have humiliated her further. She could have made her beg for forgiveness. But she didn't. Instead, she simply said, "I hope you remember this moment, Sophia." Sophia nodded quickly, her hands trembling. "I will." And just like that, she turned and slipped out of the ballroom, silently, unnoticed. For the first time, Sophia wasn't the center of attention, and she hated it. Emma sighed, turning back to Alexander. That was unexpected. He smirked. "You have a way of changing the game, Mrs. Carter." She chuckled, leaning into his side. "I just wanted to attend an event, not start a revolution." Alexander kissed the top of her head. "Well, you did both." The event had transformed into a celebration of real change. And Emma? She didn't need the approval of these people. She had something far greater, her integrity, her dignity, and a husband who had always known her worth. As the night went on, Emma stood in the ballroom, watching people donate, engage, and uplift each other. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about change. And it all started because one woman refused to be judged by her appearance. She had walked into this event as the woman they rejected. But she was leaving as the woman they would never forget. They rejected a poor woman at a fancy event, but in the end, she walked away more powerful than any of them. Emma Carter didn't need wealth or status to prove her worth. She let her actions speak for her. And because of that, she didn't just change the event. She changed the way people thought. Sophia Kingston. She learned that true power isn't in money or exclusivity. It's in kindness and respect. And Alexander Carter? He had always known that his wife was the strongest person in the room. So, let's ask you, have you ever been judged unfairly? What would you have done in Emma's place? Let us know in the comments. And if this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. For more powerful and eye-opening stories like this, hit that subscribe button now. Thank you for watching. And remember, real power is in how you treat others. Until next time.